that down, let's talk about this. You know, the Acolyte just put out episode 4, and I did an open mic about it the other day. In case there's any confusion, it's absolutely terrible. Now, if you're somebody who liked it, because I got messages from some people that liked episode 4, and if you did, thumbs up. I'm super excited for you. I'm glad you liked it. I'm not going to try to yuck on your yum and talk you out of liking it. I just talked about how I personally thought it was completely dreadful, showed a lack of even the most basic fundamental understandings of storytelling, and I thought it was just horrendous and terrible. That being said, it drives me crazy when something is terrible, and there's a lot of legitimate reasons to call it terrible. It drives me insane then when I see some people making up absolutely asinine reasons for it being terrible. Because when you start throwing out complete asinine reasons, not legitimate reasons for something being terrible, it undermines the legitimate criticism about how terrible of a piece of television that episode was. And I bring before you, as I was doing open mic, a lot of people wrote in with this one thing, and I bring before you the people exhibit Ki-Adi-Mundi. The complaints I saw coming out about this character, Ki-Adi-Mundi, who makes an appearance in The Acolyte, episode 4, show a basic fundamental misunderstanding of how Star Wars works, number one, and is again, like some things, like episode 3 was also terrible, but then people made up stuff that was never actually in episode 3 as complaints about episode 3. It's like, guys, there are plenty of reasons to dislike that episode. Stick to the legitimate ones. But this Ki-Adi-Mundi thing, there's 2 big complaints that are coming out about Ki-Adi-Mundi in this, in episode 4. And both are nonsense. Absolute, factual nonsense. And remember, I'm saying this as a guy who completely hated that episode. Completely hated it. The 2 complaints are, number 1, John, they broke canon. No, they didn't. But John, they broke canon in 2 different ways. Number 1, he shouldn't be alive during the time of the Acolyte, because according to canon, and they're wrong, according to canon, he hasn't been born yet. All right, we're going to address that. And number 2, they broke canon like Batman's back over Bane's knee, because in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, Ki-Adi-Mundi says, the Sith have been extinct for millennia, and yet in this episode, he knows about the Sith. That breaks canon. Okay. We're going to address both of those. Let's start with the charge that it broke canon by having him be alive in the events of the Acolyte when he should not have been born yet. Okay? Let's talk about that. To address this point, we got to go all the way back and talk about a certain guy at Lucasfilm by the name of Leland Chee. His official title at one point is the Lucasfilm Continuity Database Administrator, or as they sometimes called him, the head of canon. Now, in an article in 2008 in Wired, not some Gus's gas station movie reviews .fart place, but in this interview in Wired, talking about addressing the issues of canon, Leland Chee said the following: George's view of the universe is his view. He is not, as the primary filmmaker, he is not beholden to what has gone before. The careful tending of the Star Wars continuity has yielded great wealth, but the key to a productive farm is to leave some fields flexible. Again, this comes from an interview with him back in 2008. It is important to understand something here that Leland's talking about. It's like, before the Star Wars prequels came out, other expanded universe Star Wars content came out. And Leland Chee talks about in that interview that George would break that stuff all the time. But that was his purview because he was the filmmaker. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of today's video, Gametime. My wife Ann and I love going to events, whether they're comedy shows, concerts, an LA Lakers game. I mean, just the other night we went to go see Ronnie Chang and it was awesome. We love having these new experiences and new memories. And our sponsor Gametime makes getting tickets for concerts and events faster and easier, even if you don't buy tickets right away. Because prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to the show start time. With killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying event tickets. I couldn't believe how easy and most importantly, intuitively, the entire app works. Finding the event I was looking for couldn't have been easier. The way it lays out the map of the venue, letting you know exactly where the seats are that you're looking for, and how easy the process was to choose and buy those tickets. So don't worry if you think you're too late to get tickets to that big event you and your friend want to go to. They have last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever. So guys, take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Campea for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Campea, C-A-M-P-E-A, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You also have to understand this, that during the time that Star Wars was still owned by George Lucas, Canon was a very nebulous thing. At Star Wars, there were actually different degrees of canon, and that always drove me crazy because something's either canon or it's not. It's like saying a girl is sort of pregnant. No, a girl is either pregnant or she is not pregnant. There's no sort of pregnant. But at Star Wars, and this is important to understand as we're talking about Ki-Adi-Mundi being alive in the events of the Acolyte, okay? At Star Wars, there are different levels of canon, different levels of importance of canon, and some stuff that was really canon and some stuff that wasn't. First of all, there was G-level canon. That's what they called it. That is the highest true level of canon. That was G canon because it was George canon. For example, the movies, episodes 1 through 6, the released films overrode anything in the movies, overrode anything in any other level of canon. So you could have a story in a comic book at that time, but Leland Chee says George wasn't beholden to that. He could come into a movie and make something that completely overrode something that was in something else, because only his movies were G level and those take priority over anything else. Next, there was what they called T canon. That was television canon. The canonicity level comprising of the Clone Wars, which George Lucas also co-created. That basically meant if they did something in Clone Wars, George was still totally free to contradict that in the movies as the primary filmmaker. After T canon, the next level down was something called C canon. And that was continuity canon. Most of the materials from the expanded universe, including books, comics, and video games, and by the way, CD-ROMs. You're going to see how this all ties into Ki-Adi-Mundi here in a second. So you got big canon, the real canon, G canon. Right below that is T canon, then you start dropping, then there's C canon, and then there's S level canon next, secondary canon, elements introduced in continuity that wasn't contradicted by other material. Then down below that was D level canon, they called detours canon, and then way at the bottom was N canon or non-canon, stuff like what if stories, such as the first 20 issues of the Star Wars Tales of the Comic anthology. So you had all these different levels of canon, right? C-level canon was not a priority. Material from expanded universe stuff, books, comics, video games, these were things that were free to be contradicted that would then become S-level canon because that secondary canon, elements that were introduced but then later contradicted by either T-level canon on television or G-level canon, the George canon. Why is that important? Here's why it's important. Because Ki-Adi-Mundi's age, that everybody's running around and clutching their pearls about, screaming that Ki-Adi-Mundi wasn't alive at that time, was never canon. It was never canon. Ki-Adi-Mundi's year of birth was never once mentioned in anything T canon, television canon, nor was it ever mentioned in anything G level canon, the movie level canon. You know where it came from? This is what everybody's clutching their pearls about. The birth year of Ki-Adi-Mundi and his birth age literally came from a 1999 CD-ROM called Star Wars Episode 1 Insider's Guide. CD-ROM is the only place that Ki-Adi-Mundi's year of birth or age is ever mentioned. As such, it was never true canon. It was actually S-level canon, or at best, it was only ever C-level canon, which George Lucas himself established was totally ignorable. George Lucas himself said that level of canon is totally ignorable, and anything in television and the movies can override that. The whole argument that people are crying about Ki-Adi-Mundi's age was never a canon thing. You got to get that through your heads. It was never true canon. It is a piece of information that came from this place, a CD-ROM.
Looks like a sick CD-ROM, though.
It was an awesome... I had this thing. I had this CD-ROM. It was a very good CD-ROM. The whole LucasArts was getting into the interactive stuff.
Yeah.
Using the digital technologies. Okay. So that puts that to bed. That's charge number one. They broke canon by him being alive in that era. We've just firmly established they did not break canon because it was never true. Even by the old Lucasfilm standards, Ki-Adi-Mundi's birth year was never canon. Never was. All right. So let's go on to charge number two. John, they broke canon by Ki-Adi-Mundi in the Phantom Menace saying the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, and yet in the Acolyte, he's talking about Sith. The Sith have been extinct for millennia, says Ki-Adi-Mundi in the Phantom Menace. But here's the thing. They never broke canon. Why? Because in the Acolyte, Sith is never mentioned or even ever considered a possibility. In that scene, in the Acolyte that Ki-Adi-Mundi is in, that you can see in this picture, in that discussion, those Jedi standing around concluded that whoever is training May must either A, be from a splinter order of the Jedi, or B, she's being trained by a Jedi. If you go back and watch the scene, in those Jedi's minds, Sith is not a possibility because they believe there is no such thing as a Sith at this time. So they conclude in that meeting that either a splinter order might be training her or a Jedi might be training her. That is what they conclude. So this crying about they broke canon because in Phantom Menace he says the Sith have been, why is Ki-Adi-Mundi lying? He's not. In the Acolyte, Ki-Adi-Mundi and all those other Jedi still believe that the Sith are extinct. Their conclusion, that must be another Jedi training her. That is what they conclude. Therefore, the crying about they broke canon because of his whole thing about the Sith being gone for millennia is completely wrong. It's just dead wrong. Charge number one, that they broke canon by his age being there. His age was never a part of actual canon. Now listen, guys, go back and watch my open mic from yesterday. If you want to look for some legitimate reasons to crap on episode 4 of The Acolyte, which I absolutely detested, I'll give you a full laundry list of true legitimate things to go cry about. Don't start complaining about things that aren't real. Don't start complaining about his age. Never canon in the first place. The Sith are extinct. The Sith are extinct. He never said otherwise. So, yes, this whole get-a-maroo about people crying about Ki-Adi-Mundi. My God, people, find some legitimate things to complain about because there are a lot. And when you complain about this irrelevant nonsense like this that isn't even true, you undermine the legitimate criticisms about that terrible piece of television that was The Acolyte episode 4. Anyway, I'm sure some of you guys will have some thoughts about that later in the show if you want to fire in some thoughts. But what do you guys think? I mean, listen, maybe you're one of the people that actually enjoyed episode 4 of The Acolyte. And if you do, I'm jealous and I'm glad that you enjoyed it. And I'm not trying to undermine your enjoyment. I'm just letting you know I personally thought it was terrible. And I talk about why I thought it was terrible. But this whole thing about Ki-Adi-Mundi is such a great example of people who want to hate something, and instead of spending the time to actually find the legitimate things to complain about, they make shit up to complain about that isn't even real. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that whole situation. Whatever you guys think, jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.